Welcome, one and all, back to the Viper's Nest. And it has been a hot minute. I have been a very busy boy in my IRL life, but I finally found some time and some motivation to make a little bit of new content. As you can tell by the still image on the screen, we're going to be talking about Terminator today because the retro-style game Terminator 2D No Fate just released, and I would highly recommend. For $30, it is quite the wonderful game. And we have this lovely art piece by Tyrene Carver of MuseTap Studios. I will leave a link to their DeviantArt page in the description of the video. So what are we talking about in relation to Terminator today? Well, I am seeking to answer the question, can a T-800 Terminator survive in the world of Supernatural? Yes, I have done a little bit of research on to both of these topics over the last day. Terminator 2 is my favorite movie in the whole world, and I have seen the entirety of Supernatural multiple times. That does not necessarily make me an expert in these matters. I'm sure I will get some things wrong. This video is just my opinion. Do not take it as fact. So, our Terminator today will be the Schwarzenegger model, a general, normal T-800 Terminator. And we're going to drop it into the Supernatural universe at the start of the series in 2005. So let's lay a little bit of groundwork here to try and give our Terminator the best possible chance of survival, because the power scaling and general writing of Supernatural can be very inconsistent sometimes. And that's not me hating on the show. I actually really love Supernatural, and if you've been around my channel before, you probably know that the more I stick around to bitch about something generally means the more I love it, because if I just didn't like something, I wouldn't waste the time and energy researching it just to spend possibly hours later bitching about it. So I really love Supernatural. The inconsistent writing and power scaling is not me knocking the show, it's just pointing out something that happens to be, unfortunately, an integral part of the show, especially shows that go on as long as Supernatural did. So, to give our Terminator the best chance of survival when he's sent back in time from wherever and dropped into 2005, we will have his neural net CPU processor set to learn mode. You know, like they had to do about halfway through Terminator 2 with the T-800 there to allow him to actually acquire new skills, blend in better, yada yada, all that. He needs to be able to learn. And we also need to figure out how much support from Skynet itself he's going to have. So, for the purposes of this argument, I'm going to say that Skynet either does exist or will exist at some point in the Supernatural universe. Now, I'm not entirely all caught up on every single bit of Terminator lore, but from what I know, Skynet hasn't really ever jumped universes before. I know they jump timelines all the time, especially with how they fleshed out the mechanics of time travel with the Netflix show Terminator Zero, but I can't ever recall Skynet ever hopping from one universe to another before. So we're going to say that Skynet does or will exist in the Supernatural universe at some point. So knowing that, there is not a guaranteed chance, but there is a very good chance that at some point Skynet will gain access to at least the American Men of Letters libraries. You know, the bunker place that Sam and Dean end up living in. Skynet will eventually find that. I think that's a pretty good chance of that. So it will be equipped with all of the knowledge from at least that bunker, which it will then be able to equip the T-800 with regarding supernatural threats when it sends the T-800 back in time to 2005. And just to make the story flow a little bit better, I guess, we're going to say that it's sending the T-800 back in time. So essentially, there can be a Terminator within the past timeline, which will then self-perpetuate Skynet's own existence. Is it time travel bullshit? Yes, but hey, you know what? Supernatural has done that before, too. There needs to be a Terminator existing so that Skynet can exist to then send the Terminator back in time to continue Skynet's own existence. Boom. Problem solved. So, what are the stats of the T-800? Well, it's very strong and very durable. The endoskeleton is made of a coltan titanium alloy, which is a fictitious metal, but it is very, very tough, and it is very, very strong. It's also very, very smart, because, like I said, its mind, its brain, is a Cyberdyne Systems neural net processor. It's a learning computer. Yeah, it's the friggin' Terminator. I feel like everybody should know at least what the Terminator is at this point. But one thing that a lot of people tend to undersell a Terminator on is that a Terminator, even without its learning ability turned on, can be very adaptable and smart about things. Like I mentioned the Netflix show, Terminator Zero. In that show, a T-800 was sent back in time to 1990s Japan, where there was not a whole lot of guns around. A Terminator generally likes having guns. So being that that Terminator could not get its hands on a gun reliably, it crafted a wrist-mounted crossbow out of junk that it then attached to its own arm. So the Terminator will be able to get what it needs at some point. So I feel like you should know the Terminator, and if you're watching this video, if you clicked on it, I feel like you should know Supernatural pretty well as well, so I'm not going to spend too much time delving into the nitty-gritty details of every single person and entity that needs to be explained. Just know Terminator, very smart, very strong, very tough, very adaptable when it needs to be. So, how far is it going to get in Supernatural? Well, let's start at the very bottom. Let's go with the purely physical-based threats first. So, vampires, werewolves, ghouls, wraiths, wendigos, skinwalkers, shapeshifters, stuff like that. Things that are threats in a purely physical sense. The Terminator is going to be just fine. It's gonna dog walk most of the purely physical threats just based on its own strength and durability alone. And that's not even getting into the firepower that it will be able to acquire once it lands in 2005 America. It's America. There's guns everywhere. The Terminator's gonna be able to get whatever the hell it needs. And it's not even necessarily gonna need the backing of Skynet and Skynet's stolen Men of Letters knowledge in order to combat these threats. This is where some of the inconsistencies in Supernatural start to crop up. It's going to happen a lot. A lot of these creatures can only, supposedly, allegedly, be killed in very specific ways. So, like, decapitation for vampires, silver bullets to the heart for werewolves and skinwalkers, and stuff like that. They're very niche things that need to happen in order to eliminate these physical threats of a monster. That's not necessarily true. Enough overwhelming physical force will, in fact, get the job done. For example, I believe it was during the Leviathan era. Not a fan of that era, but moving on. Anyway, so there was a monster called an Okami that Bobby was dealing with. Supposedly, you need to stab it 7 times with a bamboo dagger blessed by a Shinto priest. But, as we found out later in that episode, throwing it into a wood chipper also works just fine, and that goes for most, if not all, of the purely physical threat monsters on the list. If you do enough overwhelming physical damage to them, they will stop working. And the Terminator is very good at doing overwhelming amounts of physical damage. So for the purely physical threat monster, Terminator is going to be just fine. He might have a little bit of trouble with things like wendigos and vampires that have been shown to have various levels of super speed, but this is also another kind of inconsistent thing. While the vampires and the wendigo are very, very fast, they are not fast enough that a normal, well-trained human can't deal with them. And if a normal, well-trained human can deal with these threats, then a T-800 Terminator is going to be just fine. We're going to skip over incorporeal and spectral threats for just a little bit here. I promise we'll come back to them later. I have a reason for skipping these things over. That reason is very interesting to me. It's something that I found in my research. We'll get back to that. So, moving on into like the higher tier things. Let's start with demons. Demons are... well, it's supernatural demons. They're wonky. So, again, demons possessing a host have shown to be very physically strong and durable. but also not necessarily physically strong and durable enough to be able to come over a well-trained human like a Winchester. Like, both Sam and Dean have held their own in close quarters combat with demons before, and that's even before they got things like the demon killing knife or angel blades or anything like that. So the Terminator in a physical hand-to-hand fight, or even just a physical gunfight, is not going to have too terribly much trouble with a demon host. Getting rid of the demon itself also isn't going to be too terribly much of a problem for the Terminator, because you do not have to necessarily be a person per se in order to exorcise a demon. There's twice I can think of off the top of my head where I think it was specifically Sam used a recording of himself reciting an exorcism in order to banish a demon from a person. So, knowing that, and being properly equipped with the Men of Letters knowledge from Skynet, the Terminator should be able to perform an exorcism to drive out a demon, no problem whatsoever. So normal demons aren't going to present much of a problem to the Terminator, especially if it decides to make use of things like Devil's Trap, Holy Water, and other things that hunters tend to use to deal with normal low-level demons. Getting into higher-level demons like Abaddon and Crowley and Cain and the Knights of Hell, those ones are a bit more nebulous. I don't know if the Terminator would be able to immediately think of something like a Devil's Trap bullet off the top of his head, but Devil's Traps do still work on higher-level demons, so even if he can't necessarily exorcise Crowley or Abaddon, if he can trap them and then do what like Sam and Dean tried to do, where they dismembered Abaddon and buried her different parts, he should be able to at least contain the threat enough to take it off the board, if not permanently, then for a very, very, very long time. Moving past demons and getting into angels, this is where the inconsistency of Supernatural is going to show itself even more. So, you take Castiel, for example, who at the start, at his debut, was just kind of like a normal frontline, run-of-the-mill soldier angel, and he was a very high-level cosmic threat. Like he himself said, his true form was taller than, the human's Chrysler building. But again, angels, Castiel included, have been shown to be challenged in hand-to-hand combat against normal, well-prepared people. And this frustrates me a little bit because they bigged up the angel threat so much and then still had them have trouble with just humans, especially once it got to the point where everyone and their mother, literally, had angel blades and just people could shank angels to death. So let's just proceed on the assumption that angels at least know the kind of threat they're up against with a Terminator, whether or not he has an angel blade or not. In theory, an angel should be able to just smite the T-800 out of existence. But this is a thing they almost never do, even in the show. They reserve smiting for very specific instances, and 9 times out of 10, if an angel shows up, it's either just going to telekinetically or physically throw someone around until someone brings out an angel blade and stabs the angel to death. So, a Terminator without an angel blade and being not smited, it's still going to get ragdolled simply because it does not have the means at its disposal to take out an angel. But if the Terminator does have an angel blade, then I think, again, if the angel doesn't immediately go to smiting the Terminator out of existence and chooses to engage the T-800 in close quarters combat, yeah, I'd give it like 40-60 odds in the angel's favor of winning that fight, but there's still the chance that the T-800 could get a good stab in with his looted angel blade. And then, if he sticks around long enough to learn a trick like Apocalypse Universe Bobby or Crowley did, where they melted down an angel blade and turned it into bullets, then that's just going to lead the fight even more into the Terminator's favor. Angel blade shotgun slugs, or angel blades out of a belt-fed machine gun, or something silly like that. He has the chance, but It's not a very good chance unless he gets his hands on an Angel Blade or Angel Blade bullets. So then we get to things like Archangels and Leviathan. So the T-800 has absolutely no chance against an Archangel simply because it's necessary to have an Archangel Blade to kill an Archangel. And I don't see the T-800 getting his hands on an Archangel Blade, especially since only one of them has appeared in the show ever that I can remember. It's not a thing he's going to be able to get his hands on, even if he does know about it. So I'm going to put his chances against an Archangel at basically nothing. And then there's the Leviathans, and the Leviathans are tricky because they were locked up before Earth was even a thing, and they didn't come to Earth until the events of the show, when Castiel, essentially opened the gateway for them. So the Men of Letters are not going to have any kind of knowledge whatsoever on the Leviathans, which means the T-800 will have no idea that he needs Borax in order to kill the Leviathans, unless someone like Sam and Dean tells him that. And I'm trying to keep the Terminator operating solo for this one, simply to not overly complicate things. So, is the Terminator going to be able to kill Leviathans? No. But at the same time, most Leviathans, I don't think, have the physical power to kill the T-800 either, so it would end up being a stalemate. There is a chance that a higher level Leviathan, like maybe Dick Roman or possibly Edgar, might realize what it is they're up against with a Terminator and then go and get something that could kill a Terminator, like an anti-material rifle or something of that nature, because Dick Roman is at least smart enough to use guns. He used a gun to shoot poor Bobby in the head and kill him during the Leviathan arc. So, Leviathans, at least some of them, are smart enough to go get the tools they need in order to deal with the T-800, but that's not going to be your run-of-the-mill Leviathan. Like I said, it would take someone like Dick Roman or Edgar in order to take down the T-800 in that particular instance, and the T-800 won't have what he needs to take down Leviathans. So, now I think... real quick, just because I forgot, when it comes to demons, specifically things like mind control and soul manipulation aren't really going to affect the T-800 because he doesn't have a soul, as far as I know, and his mind is essentially, well, he's a computer. It's kind of the same way that, like, a Wraith or a Djinn, I don't really think would affect the T-800 with their, like, brain fuckery abilities, because, like, the Djinn, they do a poison through the skin of a person that puts them into a hallucinatory state, and a Wraith kind of does the same thing, where they can crank up, like, to fuck with the chemicals of the brain and make people go crazy. It's not really going to affect the T-800, despite the fact that he does have living skin. He just doesn't have a living brain for that poison to go through the skin to. So, soul manipulation and mind control are pretty much off the table. Any monster that can work with tech might have a chance of controlling the T-800, but as far as I can remember, the T-800 generally operates off of a closed system. He's not going to be, like, mentally connecting to the Wi-Fi or anything like that. For someone to hack him, you would actually have to physically access his physical form and probably plug some kind of computer into him directly in order to possibly get control over him, and I don't see the T-800 really allowing that to happen. Sorry for that tangent. Anyway, back on course. Now we get to the more spectral entities, and from my reading, this is where we find the Terminator's, like, real hard counter in the supernatural universe. And it's ghosts, of all things, at least if I'm reading my own research correctly. So, ghosts have a habit of fucking with electronic systems. Angels and demons can do this, and they have before in the show, like when they show up, but as the show went on, this kind of became a little bit more inconsistent on the level of angels and demons fucking with electronics. They usually started only doing it for, like, dramatic effect. So, like, when Castiel or Crowley just kind of show up, They used to be heralded by like flickering lights and stuff, but then that kind of stopped, and they just sort of appear there when the camera pans over to them. Ghosts are not quite the same in that regard. Generally, whenever a ghost manifests, it's always with either flickering lights or cold spots. So, to my quasi-science nerd brain, this means one thing. When a ghost manifests or pulls itself together, it needs some kind of external energy source to do so. Either thermal energy, which results in cold spots, or electric energy, which is the flickering lights. So there is a chance that just by a ghost existing, it can fuck with the Terminator's systems. Now, I don't think it's going to drain the Terminator's batteries or anything. It'll probably just, for a normal ghost, might mess with its targeting system or its heads-up display or something like that. You know, minor glitches in the Terminator's system. So, yeah, they're not going to drain his batteries. Like, if I remember Terminator 3 correctly, which I kind of try not to remember that movie, the Terminator is powered by 2 hydrogen fuel cells, and like he said in my favorite movie, Terminator 2, he can exist for 150 years on his current power cell, singular. So I'm assuming with 2 hydrogen fuel cells in him, that's 300 or so years worth of power. You're not draining that battery in the space of a couple of minutes. But you might be able to mess with his, like I said, his heads-up display, his targeting system, his sensors, all that kind of stuff. However, a more longer existing or smart ghost, say Ghost Bobby, for example, I could very well see them using their ghostly nature to fuck with specific systems on the Terminator, like maybe shutting off its optical sensors, maybe shutting down its neural net CPU processor brain completely. Like I said, Ghost being able to mess with and affect electronic systems, to me, says that they are very likely the hard counter to the T-800 in the supernatural universe. Even though dealing with a ghost is relatively simple, you know, salt lines, salt circles, salt shotgun rounds, burning the remains, all things that a T-800 could very easily do. The problem lies in being in the presence of the ghost itself, and the ghost will quickly realize that if the T-800 is like fucking with its remains or whatever object it is tied to, they're very quickly going to take any and all steps they possibly can to keep the T-800 from doing exactly that, and their nature as a ghost and ability to fuck with electrical systems gives the ghost a very, very good chance of, you know, essentially defeating the T-800. Which I thought was actually kind of freaking cool in my research, that ghosts of all things might be the hard counter to the T-800. So, you may notice I didn't bring up Chuck/God or the Winchesters and their plot armor in this video. I thought that was maybe a step too far for just a survival challenge involving the T-800. I mean, Chuck is literally God of the supernatural universe, and if God doesn't want the T-800 there, then the T-800 simply isn't going to be there. And throwing the T-800 up against Sam and Dean Winchester, I mean, I'm not entirely sure why you would, honestly. Like, looking at their story as a whole, I don't see why Skynet would necessarily think that the Winchesters are a threat. I mean, they could be if they wanted to be. But if we're assuming that Skynet, at least as of the end of the Supernatural TV show, doesn't exist yet, then Sam and Dean both will not be on Earth to help fight Skynet. So Skynet could really just play the waiting game and not ever have to deal with them in the first place. And not even counting that, like I said, Chuck literally gave Sam and Dean plot armor. So even if Chuck allows the T-800 to stick around, if it comes into conflict with the Winchester brothers, like, I actually give the Winchesters a pretty good chance against the T-800 even without their plot armor. Like, humans have dealt with Terminators before, crushing them in a hydraulic press, like in T1, Sarah Connor helping the T-800 against the T-1000 and Terminator 2. Like, humans overcome Terminators all the freaking time. I'm sure someone as well trained as Sam and Dean could easily figure out how to deal with a Terminator. But even if they couldn't, Chuck's not going to allow his favorite Sam and Dean to be defeated by a Terminator. It's plot armor, so just having those two things in this survival challenge just kind of seem a little bit ridiculous and a little bit too unfair, in my opinion. But that's what I got for you today. I hope you enjoyed my little deep dive into two of my favorite fandoms and how they might interact. I am kicking around the idea of doing another similar video for a Predator, from Predator versus Supernatural. That one's going to require a little bit more research to try and figure out, like, which version of the Predator I might use, what their experience level might be, and all that kind of stuff. But I might get to that sometime, later this week or next week. Who knows? Anyway, thank you for listening. A like and a subscribe and a comment would sure be appreciated. I will see you on the next episode, and as always, have yourself a wonderful day.